The Heat kicked off training camp on Tuesday, and there are already questions about Eric Spoelstra's rotations. Kyle Lowry thinks he should be the starting point guard, but is that the right choice? And how does this impact Tyler Herro and his role on the team? Plus, some clarifications on Miami's pursuit of Jrue Holiday. All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. Joining me as always, Dave Ramil, however you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I want to get to what Tyler Herro said about his role in the reports that the Heat did try to get Jrue Holiday in a minute. First, the Heat are holding training camp this week at FAU in Boca Raton. From a reporting perspective, David, a little annoying having to drive all the way up there to Boca from Miami to cover a training camp where they could have just done it at the arena right here. But also from a reporting perspective, I was surprised by just sort of how casual the whole thing was. It felt a little bit like Summer League. I don't know how many people really understand what I'm talking about there, but like it just real quick peek, like when you go to Las Vegas, like everything is so chill, everything is so casual, everybody's really easy to talk to. When we go to the Miami Heat practices on the Heat practice floor at Kaseya Center, it's very, very structured. All the media is sort of like huddled up in a corner, and it's the only corner that we're really allowed to stand in. And we're just sort of waiting for players to pass by that we could talk to them. And then obviously the organized scrums that are put together by the PR department there. But here at FAU, everybody is sort of on visiting turf. And so we're all just kind of walking around and doing our thing, which again is sort of what it's like in Las Vegas, where you're just sort of walking around talking to people. And I thought from a reporting perspective, it was very interesting having that opportunity to really get a sense of what's going on at training camp. And in that respect, it felt a little bit different than practice. And I think over the course of this week, David, we'll be able to get a lot more insights because of that. But the biggest insight that came from Monday's
big enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The biggest one that came from Monday's media session was Kyle Lowry saying that he expects to be the starting point guard. And there's no room for nuance here, David. The quote is literally, "I expect to be the starting point guard," end quote. What do you think of Kyle Lowry starting and saying that?
Well, I think the second part of that question is easier to answer. He's an NBA point guard. He's a veteran, potential Hall of Famer, and he's certainly earned the right to be that confident about who he is as a player. We didn't see him at media day. He was kind of lurking behind everything and kind of avoided media, perhaps for good reason. He's also in year 18 of his NBA career. He's done plenty of media days. He knows the drill. It's not going to necessarily.
He only does media when he absolutely is required to.
He has been persnickety with media for a long time, and it's gotten even more persnickety. Like many elderly people, when they move to South Florida, they get much more set in their ways once they do move. I think the same could be said of Kyle Lowry. Even at this point in his career, he avoided media, and he avoids them as much as possible. So
I'll say this for Kyle Lowry. I don't mean to get off topic. You use the word persnickety. I think he's persnickety about doing media, but once he's actually in front of us and talking, he's very good. Like, he's very, very cool, and he answers all your questions, and he's patient with you. He just tries to avoid it as much as he can. But anyway, we're off topic.
Yeah,
but that was the case today. He was very honest and he was very forthcoming.
So I think he's again earned the right to be able to say this and to say I think I'm the starting point guard. One, because look at the rest of the roster. Who's going to be your biggest competition as a point guard? There's only one other point guard on the roster, and it's Drew Smith. And the guy spent a cup of coffee in the league last year and hasn't exactly established himself as a clear-cut option.
And he's not even really on the roster because he's a two-way guy, and you have limitations to how many games you can play.
Right. There's RJ Hampton also on a limited contract there. He's not exactly a lot of different options for Miami. Maybe you could go, as we've theorized before, with Tyler Herro, Josh Richardson. On media day itself, Eric Spoelstra saying the guard position is wide open. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have an established point guard per se. So I think that's okay for Kyle to go out and say this. Heat fans have taken umbrage with this. Personally, I think it's ridiculous. As I said, as a veteran, as the only point guard on the team under contract, I think he's earned the right to be able to say that. the first part of your question, however, I think he's absolutely right. Like, he should be the starter on this team. Like, I know we've debated the strengths of Tyler Herro and or Josh Richardson starting in the backcourt, but I don't know how viable those are. When you look at Miami's toughest competition in the Eastern Conference, specifically Boston and Milwaukee and the upgrades they've had at point guard, I think I would rather trust Kyle Lowry to be able to hold his own defensively and as a playmaker out on the floor, because Miami's biggest strength and their best chance of defeating either of those opponents during the regular season and in the postseason is based on Miami's depth. And given that, I think you would rather have guys like Caleb Martin and Josh Richardson come off the bench and provide the spark that they will, so that Kyle Lowry can continue to thrive as a starter or play well as a starter. Not even thrive. Let's say play well as a starter. And it's not married to anything. Like, you can start Kevin Love. You can start Kyle Lowry. And you can put him right back on the bench after 10 minutes, and they don't have to sniff the rest of the game if that's what matters. It doesn't really mean anything for him to be the starter. It's so much as just him settling in with those guys that he's used to playing, whether it's Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, etc. I think you can have him as a starter, and it's the best, most functional unit for Miami moving forward.
So you've thought that even prior to media day and his comments at training camp today, and I was very much on the other side of this. I thought that Kyle Lowry could not start. I thought that Miami's best stretch and his best stretch was when he was coming off the bench last year. He's 37 years old. It's okay to not be a starter anymore at this point in your career. But you bring up a lot of good points, and I think based on what I heard at media day and what I heard today at training camp, I think I'm starting to lean the other direction, right? And it's not what I think should be the starting lineup, but I'm starting to expect that maybe Kyle Lowry is going to end up starting here based on what I've heard the last couple of days. Eric Spoelstra, like you said, mentioned that maybe you don't really need a real point guard in today's NBA. And by the way, Tyler Herro said the same thing. And I think Bam also said something similar. But he also mentioned that he doesn't envision himself, quote unquote, writing in Tyler Herro at point guard. Okay, well, then who are you going to write in at point guard? Kyle Lowry coming out today and saying, I expect to be the point guard. Okay. Well, if you're going to write somebody in at point guard and you only have, to your point, one real point guard on the roster, then perhaps it would be Kyle Lowry. I also understand why Kyle Lowry said this. He has started 801 of 841 games since becoming a full-time starter, which happened 13 years ago. So he is very much accustomed to being a starter, and the fact that he wasn't a starter for the playoffs and for the end of the last regular season was a new thing for him. The guy that he ended up backing up, Gabe Vincent, no longer on the team. He's with the Lakers, signing with them as a free agent. So I understand, again, why he would say this. But the other part of this that's very important is that when he was asked if he had that conversation with Eric Spoelstra, he said, no, I have not had that conversation with Eric Spoelstra, but I do expect to be the starting point guard for the team this season. When Spo was asked about it, he said, I haven't even made my mind up about who the starting five is going to be. Training camp and preseason are going to be very, helpful things for us as we try to figure it out. I actually believe Spo when he says he doesn't really. I'm sure he has an idea, but I don't think it's set, and I think he wants to see what this stuff looks like. The practice today consisted of like mixed lineup scrimmages, right? So I don't think there was like a starting team versus the second unit. I don't think that happened. Yeah. He will do that at some point, maybe not even in training camp, but at some point in the regular season. That usually gets some of those kinds of runs, but they're very much in sort of like all of this is squishy and we're just sort of trying to figure it out mode. And so we'll see what happens. But the other thing,
it's a bit hyperbolic too, though. Sorry, just to add to that, it's a bit hyperbolic. Spo's statement, like 60% of the lineup is set between Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler. It's all about figuring out who else complements those two players. Three players, excuse me.
Maybe. I actually want to bring up that Tyler Herro point a little bit later on. That's my tease for the second segment. But the other part of this too, David, is Kyle Lowry mentioning that, he remarked, the most people forget how good I was playing before I got hurt, right? And there was a point last year where he led the league in minutes played. Solid. And he said, I probably just overdid it early in the year. It's fair if you're Kyle Lowry to say, what if I don't go so pedal to the metal in the first 2 months of the season? And by the way, there's a lot of reasons that the Heat had to do that. They were dealing with a lot of injuries and things like that. But if he doesn't have to do that, maybe he can sort of sustain that kind of level of play for a little bit more. He also mentioned that he doesn't expect to be playing 42 minutes a game. And I think that's at least a nice little bit of self-awareness there. 20 to 25 minutes a night, whether or not he starts or comes off the bench, I think is going to be where you want him. You mentioned kind of what it is that they did with Kevin Love last year as their starting power forward, and there was a reason to start him. You wanted to start off with some size, and then as teams get going, they tend to get smaller, and so you have Kevin Love start, and then you, along with your opponent, can kind of match up and get smaller as the game goes on. I just wonder what the strategy would be with Kyle Lowry. Why do you want him to start? Is it because you want him to set the table for Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo? My argument for him coming off the bench was you don't really need him to start because Jimmy Butler is very capable of setting the table for himself, right? He can go get his own plate and his own fork and his own spoon just fine. But maybe that bench unit needs somebody to set the table for them. And that's sort of why I've been arguing that Lowry should come off the bench. I actually think it's more of a strength for him to come off the bench. And it has nothing to do with him not being capable of being a starter. But again, we'll see where this thing ends up. I think all of this was sort of blown out of proportion, if I'm being honest. I think him just expecting to be a starter, saying he expects to start, isn't really a big deal. Spo saying afterwards, I love that he's saying that. Like, Spo has said this for years. He wants all 15 guys to think that they should be starting, right? That's the kind of competitive roster that you want. So I don't think any of this really means a whole lot of anything, but I will say, just based on some of the other clues that I've picked up over the last couple of days, if the season started tomorrow, maybe Kyle Lowry is in that starting lineup, which is not how I felt going into all this.
I think it would mean something more. Like, it's great that Spo talks that way, but in reality, it has never worked that way. To say that you're competitive and you like that attitude from Tyler, etc., but eventually feathers will be ruffled, and you don't want to start to create that kind of early divisiveness between the roster as far as guys competing for a spot and things like that. So I get what Spo's saying. Yes, you want people competing.
They did feel pressured almost to start Tyler Herro after last year, right?
Right.
So,
right. I mean, he signs a big extension.
Maybe you could just trade Kyle Lowry. You don't have to deal with it anymore. Talk about that in the third segment, but not in the next segment. The next segment, I already teased it, but Tyler Herro starting lineup, maybe not. Maybe not, David. I want to throw another alternative at you after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. It's football season. That means pizza, wings, maybe even some buffalo chicken dip. Whatever you prefer at your tailgate, go all out. Get cash back on every purchase with Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to party goods. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing, and you can either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy, believe me. I've seen my wife doing it for months. It is so simple, and you get cash back. Who doesn't want that? Get cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too. So when you start using Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more, you get cash back from those. Download the Ibotta app now and use the code LOCKED, that's LOCKED, to start earning real cash back. Just go to the apps or Google Play Store and the Ibotta app, App Store, and don't forget to use the code LOCKED.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. We had loads of content come out Monday and Tuesday morning, David. If anybody kept up with it, I can just tip of the cap. Thank you so much if you did, but there's no way that you did, because there was a lot of interviews with almost every player on the roster. We had a full podcast, you and I, breaking down our biggest takeaways from Media Day, including emo Jimmy Butler, and what we thought that this season could look like, and a whole lot of other things. So
R.I.P. emo Jimmy Butler too. I mean, that's too bad. It was only a one-day thing. I mean, I
was like, you guys make such a bigger deal out of this than we do, and I was like, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, it's Media Day. You got more reporters there than he shows up, looking completely differently than he does. So yeah, I get it.
You're the basketball coach. I would expect you not to make it. Like, you got to coach the basketball team. We got to create content. We have a job. You have a job. Yeah, we're gonna make a bigger deal out of the Jimmy Butler thing. Of course.
That's right. That's right. But can I just say, look, I texted you earlier, and I know it sounds like I'm going to be biased about our podcast and everything else. What hilarious and insightful and great content! Like, if you haven't subscribed, this is your chance to do so. But at the same time, go and check out the stuff from Media Day, because it's just, if you want to get to know these players in a much more relaxed environment, and eating Oreo cookies and talking about high school careers and
What was the most underrated? What do you think is the most underrated interview we did? Obviously, we have like the bigger guys like Nikola Jovic, Duncan Robinson, Orlando Robinson. I thought was great. We actually did 20 minutes.
Fantastic.
That flew right by. But
yes,
he was the training camp guys, the lesser known guys.
RJ Hampton was really, really good. I think Jamal Cain, I was surprised. I had told you before, I was first guys we talked to, and Alanis Williams too. Really, really funny, really interesting. It was just
I really like Justin Champagny, but mostly because we spent like 70% of the show discussing pizza. So I really like. You know me. I
go to Poochie's. Just mention. We had the
Miami Slice. The Miami Slice shout out from Duncan Robinson last year, and we got the Poochie's shout out this year. We're just one of them should sponsor the show at some point. That would be nice. We'll just start doing credit pizza slices instead of credit cookies, maybe.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with
that. What's something that starts with a P? Positive pizza? I don't know. Workshopping it. All right. So let's just get right into this. Tyler Herro, should he come off the bench if Kyle Lowry starts? Because I think Kyle Lowry is a very good player. I don't think he's a very good defender anymore at 37 years old, and I think that's okay to say. I think he's smart. I think he draws fouls. I think that maybe the new NBA flopping rules could hurt some of those foul drawing techniques, let's just say. But Tyler Herro is also a negative defender. And if you start Lowry, Herro, and Kevin Love, I'm a little bit worried about how that lineup's going to hold up defensively. Even if you say, okay, well, you're going to take these guys out after a few minutes. Okay, like we saw what a few minutes could do in the NBA Finals. It can lose you games in the NBA Finals, right? Like,
fair enough.
I just don't. I think you need to be a little bit more firm defensively to start games. And if you're committed to Kyle Lowry starting, I wonder if they go with like a Josh Richardson or even a Caleb Martin at the 2, and then bring Tyler Herro off the bench, which would also have that added benefit of, well, you're bringing Tyler Herro off the bench. He already proved that he's the best at doing that in the league 2 years ago. I'd only imagine he's probably better at it now, 2 years later. And maybe if you're looking to explore trading him later on, you eliminate some of those concerns about him being a starter. You just say, look, this guy's a sixth man. He is what he is. But guess what? He's going to score 20 points per game for 3 years in a row. He's going to be the best at it in the league. So if you don't want that, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. I'm interested in the idea. Are we getting ahead of ourselves by just sort of expecting or suspecting that Tyler Herro is going to end up being the starting 2 guard when maybe it's not so set in stone?
No, I think those are important questions that you have to consider and answer in terms of, finding the right balance amongst your starters. I know Spo would probably downplay it, and of course that's what training camp is all about. But I think it's worth discussing because, it sets the tone for the rest of the season and stuff like that. And you have to start gauging this roster early on, because we've heard Pat Riley specifically say he likes that 20-game benchmark in terms of whether or not he thinks a move needs to be made. And I know Heat fans won't be happy with that, but this roster is pretty set. I don't think it's going to change, certainly not to the dramatic impact. Well, maybe we'll talk about that in the next segment. I think there's other possibilities out there. But as far as, Tyler coming off the bench, I also think that cat is out of the bag. There is no way that you can turn back and send him back to the bench. And I also don't think it's in his best interest. I'd rather him go out there and force him into that same attitude that we heard from him prior to last postseason, where he acknowledged, I know I've been picked at. I know I've been targeted on defense. I'm ready to take that next leap as a defender. And unfortunately, we never got that opportunity to see whether or not he could step up in that role. I want to see 23-year-old Tyler Herro say, you know what, I can be a two-way player. I can be a star in this league, not just a good scorer that gets targeted defensively. I can be both. I can hold my own at the very least defensively. Like, no one's expecting him to be Jimmy freaking Butler, but we want him to be able to, navigate screens better, be able to force turnovers more effectively, not get bullied in the low post, all those kinds of things. And I think with the added weight, the added experience, and just more opportunity as a starter, I think he'll get there. So I personally, I'd see Tyler probably finding a way to thrive alongside Kyle Lowry more likely than him coming off the bench.
For the record, I agree with you. Okay. And I kind of just brought up the Tyler Herro thing more as an argument, but I also think that it is a real thing that I don't think that he is cemented in as a starter the way that Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are. Like, he could lose that
Correct.
job. Jimmy and Bam are not losing their starting jobs. So I still think you're right. And by the way, for the record, like, also, I think Tyler Herro tries really hard defensively. This is not like a Trae Young situation or a Zach LaVine. Like, he tries hard.
Or Dame Lillard situation.
Sure. He tries hard. But there's just like natural limitations. He's got like the short wingspan. He's not super athletic when he's going side to side. He's obviously smaller, so people could shoot over him. As an isolation defender, he does grade out, with, from the metrics and stuff, as one of the worst ones in the NBA. But as a team defender, I actually think he's quite good, and he's usually in the right spot, and he tries really hard. And I think of somebody like Steph Curry, who was a very bad defender for most of his career because he's small. And I remember talking with Steph's trainer and just being like, most people peak physically at 26, 27, 28, 29. Steph wasn't peaking physically until 30, 31, 32. And that's why we saw him have those great seasons and kind of even post Kevin Durant help win a championship for the Warriors. I think Tyler Herro physically is similar. I think his peak in terms of physical maturity will probably come closer to 30 than it does 27. Unfortunately for Miami, he's not close to any of those ages right now. He's still just 23. Right. But I do think that eventually he'll get there. That said, he is putting on weight. He is getting stronger, and all that stuff does really help.
Using Golden State as an example, though, I mean, again, to your earlier point in the segment, like, you had to find the right balance. And their best lineups were Andre Iguodala, another worldly defender earlier in his career. Draymond Green, one of the best defenders in NBA history. Klay Thompson, great defender. Later on, Kevon Looney, who can hold his own, more size, allowing – yeah, exactly. They've had plenty of other defenders surrounding him.
That's the problem with Tyler
Herro. The right balance. Yeah, you have
and
to
that's
find the
right
right
issue.
balance.
It's like with Tyler, I don't think like Lowry just at this stage, it doesn't really make sense. Like Kevin Love, maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then again, like Miami got to the finals with Gabe Vincent, who is a willing defender but still small. You could shoot right over him. Max Strus, who is better than Tyler Herro defensively last year, but still not like he's not making an all defensive team. And then Kevin Love out there to start games for the first 8 to 10 minutes of every half. Like they still were able to put together a great defense in important moments. So maybe all this stuff is overstated and overblown, but I still think that the Heat have to find a way to get Jimmy and Bam some help defensively as well as offensively. Tyler Herro is obviously their best, most talented, most dynamic scorer. He can help them offensively. What are the pieces that you plug in around those guys? I think to your original point, David, it's like sort of, if we do kind of if Jimmy and Bam are in Sharpie and Tyler Herro is in a number 2 pencil, then those other 2 spots I think are just blanks right now. Although Kyle Lowry and Kevin Love could just be right now the answers by default. I suspect they probably have the inside track because we're talking about all these great options and what you're looking for. Or I'm sorry, we're talking about what you're looking for and all the like what you would want around these guys. I don't know that the Heat have those guys on the roster, right? So. Because if you start Caleb Martin at the 4, then you're small. There's an
option. I mean, perhaps too optimistically, but if we buy into the hype and what we've seen from him in the past, no, I was not going to say that. I'm saying Haywood Highsmith. I think he's the perfect complementary player. Doesn't need his shots.
Very much in the cards to start at power forward. Very, very much in the cards.
I think he's
win that job.
He's in that sweet spot of, he can put up whatever points if he's improving as a shooter. And we've talked about it, and we talked about it with him as a corner shooter, especially in threes, being able to bring the ball Robinson up. Yeah, I think he doesn't need a lot of shots, but he'll get his opportunities. And if he can thrive as a defender playing alongside Jimmy and Bam, that's a pretty solid defensive front court there.
Yep. Maybe you could trade for PJ Tucker and part of a larger deal too. You're going to hate our next segment, David.
I already do.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Every dayers, make sure that you are subscribed and tuned in throughout the week for more training camp takeaways. We are there in Boca Raton covering training camp. And again, if you've missed any of the interviews or anything like that, you could check them all out. We got the individual interviews posted on YouTube, and then on the podcast app, however you listen to that, we strung a few together, parts 1, 2, and 3 of all those interviews as well. And by the way, if you're not following us on social media, specifically on Instagram, make sure you search for Locked On Heat on Instagram. Follow us there because we also posted some additional social content on that, as well as some shorts and some reels and things that the kids like these days. So make sure you check that out. All right. So we missed this in all the sort of the media day kerfuffle yesterday, David, but Brian Windhorst and Zach Lowe both reported on Monday that the Heat did make an offer for Jrue Holiday, who Portland ended up trading to the Boston Celtics. We discussed how that affects Miami, Jrue Holiday being on the Celtics, Dame obviously being on Milwaukee. We discussed that on Monday afternoon's episode. But in terms of the reporting on this, it's unclear what that offer was that Miami made for Jrue Holiday, but they spoke. Like the Heat's front office and the Blazers front office spoke for the first time since July, not about Damian Lillard, obviously, but about Jrue Holiday. What this tells me, and look, I don't really care about speculating what that offer was. I really don't. Like, I'm so sick of that conversation. But
Yeah,
I think what is interesting here and what the real important takeaway, honestly, is the Heat aren't satisfied with this roster, that they've planned on acquiring a new point guard this offseason, a star point guard, right? Like Damian Lillard, obviously. That didn't happen. So the fact that they called about Jrue Holiday showed, okay, like if we didn't get the first star point guard, this new one came on the market. We'd really like this star point guard. The common denominator to all the things that they've been talking about here is point guard, right? And one of the reasons Kyle Lowry is the only true point guard on the roster is because they thought they were going to get another point guard on the roster. That's a big part of all this and why the roster is constructed the way that it is right now and why they didn't go out and sign a backup point guard, right? And that still is, by the way, an option. They only have 13 players under contract, I believe. So anyway, I think that all of this makes sense just based on where the roster is, that they'd be calling about Jrue Holiday. Yeah.
If just to add more context to this, because so much of it gets lost in the discussion, especially with Dame and Jrue and everything else like that. It's like there should be no negative connotation to this. It's just a good player becomes available. Why wouldn't you want to add them to your roster, especially if they represent an upgrade? So it's not necessarily, again, we've talked about this in terms of Tyler, and I think we can use this same thing, extrapolate it out towards Lowry. It's like Lowry can still be a good functional player on your roster, but if an upgrade becomes available, and I think Kyle would be the first to, well, maybe not the first, but I think he would begrudgingly admit that Damian Lillard at this point in his career and Jrue Holiday represent upgrades over the current version of Kyle Lowry. And that's fine. And if those upgrades become available, as they did over the last couple of months, Miami is absolutely in their right and very smartly chose to pursue those and see what they could do to acquire. That's not necessarily saying, God, we're stuck with Kyle Lowry, which I think is what a lot of Heat fans feel. It's like, now we're stuck with Lowry because they swung and missed on these two guys. I think you try to get them 9 times out of 10. And look, I mean, Tyler Herro is a very good player. Like, they were still trying to include him in these deals because, well, those players are better and might help Miami's title pursuits more. I don't think it's necessarily it shouldn't reflect negatively on these individual players just because they were included in these rumored deals.
I'm with you 100%. When Kevin Durant is out there, you try to get him. When Damian Lillard is out there, you just try to get him. Guess what? If Giannis or Joel Embiid demanded a trade tomorrow, all these players on the roster, right? Well, most of them, you know what I mean, are included in those trade rumors. Like, their futures are up in the air because you have an opportunity to go get an all-timer, right? And so, yeah, I'm with you on that. But I want to again get to my point here. The Heat want an upgrade at point guard. They are specifically looking to upgrade that position, and I don't think that that's debatable at this point, right? Like, they chased Dame, they didn't get him. They tried to get Jrue Holiday. They didn't get him. And I think the next point guard that becomes available, they'll probably go after that player, if that player is a reasonable upgrade over Kyle Lowry, obviously, and not just any point guard. But the next, big time all-star level-ish point guard that comes available, they're probably going to go after that player, right? They're looking for somebody to maybe be the head of the snake on that offense that they didn't really have, and maybe that they expected Kyle Lowry to be. And he, as good as he is, and historically, and he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's not really that player anymore. Can I give you 3 names that we need to look out for?
Yes.
Well, not really. It's 2 names. But one name this is the fake one, Malcolm Brogdon. He's out there. Portland's going to try to get something. There are people that think that they can get a reasonable return from Malcolm Brogdon. I don't really think that, because Malcolm Brogdon literally couldn't get traded earlier this summer. Like, just literally could not. It was not allowed for them to trade him because of the injury history with him. So I'm not quite so sure that Brogdon ends up in Miami. If Brogdon ends up anywhere, maybe it's the Clippers. Like, they give up like 2 Robert Covington contracts and then they get to Brogdon.
What's his salary?
It's like 20 million, something around there, 20, 22
That's
million.
very high. That's very high.
Like the only thing you could do is like, I don't even know with the percentages and all that stuff. It's over my head. But like if it was even hypothetically Duncan for Malcolm Brogdon straight up, I don't think Miami would do that.
No,
I mean,
that's
maybe
not
to get
worth
out
it.
of the Duncan Robinson contract, but I don't think that they look at Duncan Robinson that way anymore.
I don't either. I wouldn't
Especially with
think so.
Struce
Like
gone.
the best bet is probably for Brogdon and his representatives to negotiate a buyout where he would enter as a free agent again. And if that's the case, then
Interesting.
Miami could sign him to a deal
And even then,
further down the road. And Portland's talked about it.
I like Brogdon fine. But he's not really the guy that Miami's looking for. He's not like a, hey, put the ball in his hands, let him go get a bucket kind of guy.
He was really good at the start of last year. Remember when everybody was hyping up the Celtics big time and they were talking about him as like sixth man of the year and everything else, and like starting him over Marcus Smart, and they had all these different options, and then he got hurt. And we've seen this play out with Kyle Lowry too. Yeah. Unfortunately, once you get hurt and once you're a certain age, and Brogdon's had to deal with numerous.
It's always he's hurt every year. And look, I think the buyout thing is really interesting. And if that happens, obviously the Heat could kick the tires on that. In terms of trading real stuff for him, I just think it's a little too risky. And I don't. And again,
second round picks, maybe.
They only have
second round pick. Conditional first, maybe. Ugh. Really conditional.
Even that's a little icky. Like even that's because like if you condition the first, now it locks it up from other trades. Like even that is a little. Right. It's you know what I mean. Yeah, that's a little.
And you can't count on.
I like Brogdon just fine, but it's not really the guy. So let me give you two more names then.
All right.
It was reported this week that Donovan Mitchell is not going to sign the extension with Cleveland. You keep talking to people who really know this thing, like this Donovan Mitchell situation, and they kind of keep saying, we don't think he's long for Cleveland. He's not signing the extension with the Cavaliers. He already told that to the front office, and it's been reported.
Yeah.
He'd obviously did that whole dance last summer. It didn't work. I wonder if they learned from that chase. They learned from the Dame chase that they can't really be stingy with it. But at the same time, Donovan Mitchell's not going to get the return if he's traded again that Utah got for him from Cleveland. Like that's not how these things work. You don't get the like for like return anymore. So I do wonder if Donovan Mitchell is actually more of a realistic get, a guy that the Heat have maybe the assets to acquire. It's just a name that I want to put out there.
Yeah, that seems a little realistic and far too similar to what we've done over the last couple of months. A lot of speculation there. I mean, I've heard the same thing about the buzz and people speculating about his future and stuff like that. But, you know, that changes so dramatically. Like, you know, think about the years of conversation and the teams perhaps jockeying for position to acquire Giannis, only for him to go a couple of years ago and say, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and stick around and sign a Supermax extension with the team that he played for. So
this one reminds me more of Paul George, where it wasn't like, hey, trade me when Paul George was dealing with the Indiana Pacers front office. It wasn't like, hey, trade me. It was more like, just so you know, I'm not signing the extension. And do with that information, like, you should probably trade me. If you do, I'd like to go to LA. But it was sort of like an amicable thing. I remember
they traded him to Oklahoma City, though.
They traded him to Oklahoma City. Yeah, like totally. Like they went and got the return for him. I'm just saying, like Miami was motivated to get Donovan Mitchell in the past. I wonder if they would circle. Like I'm not saying that they're going to get him and that Donovan Mitchell is going to force his way to Miami. I just think that if he were to come available, the Heat would be making phone calls. Also worth noting, Kyle Lowry and somebody like Jaime Jaquez Jr., literally an exact match for Donovan Mitchell's salary this season. I'm just saying that. You throw 2 first-round picks at Cleveland, 2028 and 2030.
Doing that.
You're not doing it, or Miami's not doing it?
No, I mean, yeah, Cleveland's not doing that. We just went through the
2 first-round picks on Jaime Jaquez for Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, we just
you're gonna have to pay a lot of money.
We saw Dame draw significantly more than that, and the discussion about the actual value.
Mitchell's not Miami. Mitchell's value went down since he got traded to Utah. Like Donovan Mitchell's like,
I don't know. Is the third name Colin Sexton?
It's not. Is that your third name?
I hope it's not that guy from Philadelphia who may or may not show up to camp.
That is my third name. He is not. It's James Harden, man. It's James Harden. I just think after all of this has been all the dust is settled, the Heat went after Dame. They didn't get him. They went after Jrue Holiday. They didn't get him. Like, who's the next pick and roll handler? James Harden is an elite pick and roll ball handler. Elite. Like, literally the only one that was better than him at his volume was Luka Doncic, who might be one of the best 5 or 6 players, who is one of the best 5 or 6 players in the NBA.
He's a good point guard too. Why don't you throw his name in there?
In 2027, I will be. So, but James Harden is an elite pick and roll ball handler. Overnight, he would be an elite pick and roll 2-man game with Bam Adebayo, just like overnight it was an elite 2-man game with him and Joel Embiid, with absolutely zero chemistry. Just because of their talents, they were elite. I think Bam and Harden would be elite in that 2-man game pick and roll. The other part of that too is I know he's not Houston James Harden anymore, but you still look at the metrics, man. He could break down a guy on offense and still get his points in isolation. Again, not at that MVP level, but he's like in the 86th percentile or something. Jimmy Butler, as great of an ISO guy he was like in the 75th percentile last season. So that's a significant upgrade even there. And for 1 year, David, let me just propose this to you. Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson, do you say yes?
No.
You still want to do it. Lowry and Duncan for Harden. I don't know. I have no idea what Harden's value is at this point. But if that's the offer on the table, if you're Miami, you have to have a meeting about it, no?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they would do their discussion and everything else like that. We had this discussion on Locked On NBA yesterday. I mean, it's just basically Clippers or bust. That's the team he wants to play for. And given his history, and you brought it out, his Hall of Fame career at requesting trades, and I just don't know that Miami, like there was some buzz today about, there was some buzz today about Miami frowning on Jimmy Butler's hairstyle, as innocuous as you could possibly get.
I don't buy that at all, by the way.
All right, neither do I. And we're going to get pictures of James Harden at Tootsie's the night before a playoff game, with the baby or whoever. And it's just like, how is Miami going to handle that? Okay, like I shouldn't even know who the baby is.
Who cares?
I shouldn't even know who that is.
First of all,
the only reason I know that is because of freaking James Harden always being in clubs with this guy.
It had to be like Miami or South Florida based rappers, first of all. So who's
he
Rick
taking?
Ross, I don't know if he's still doing Tootsies at this point.
He's going to Wingstop, brother. I don't think he's going to be there. I mean, I don't
chicken
see
sandwiches, did you hear? It's only every commercial on Dolphins games.
I haven't seen it, but I don't see that as a likely fit there.
It would be Kodak Black, Florida Panthers favorite, or like Denzel Curry could make an appearance. He's a South Florida guy. Like I don't know, like somebody like that. But look, I think like all that stuff you're saying, I agree.
You're missing the point here. You're missing the point here. Yeah, it's not the.
You're probably right. I did get sidetracked a little bit, but. Who cares if he does all that? Because then you just walk away after a year. He's an expiring deal. If it goes like it's not even 12 months that we're talking about. We're talking about like 8 months.
Is he gonna really be engaged? Like, how long has he been in Philadelphia? We heard this buzz about it he's been there for less than a year.
He was a borderline all-star last year. You can get one good year of James Harden. The problem is getting 2 good years out of James Harden on one team. And fortunately for the Heat, all they need is 1 good year. James Harden was really good last season. People forget about that. It looked great. It was all this stink is just recent. The stink is like the last 3 months, but during the season, it was fine. I mean, he had his playoff meltdowns, but he also had 2 really good games against Boston. The other games were not so good, but he had 2 really good games against Boston in the second round.
I guess Miami hang their hat on that as opposed to like, again,
hanging their hat on game, but they didn't get them. So now they're desperate.
Okay, I see your point. I'm just going to put it out there. For the record, I do not think Miami has any interest in acquiring James Harden. I don't know if it's necessarily a great idea either. I think there are concerns, and those are legitimate. And I don't know that they necessarily represent that much of an upgrade because there is a high risk involved. And I think Miami, at this point right now, feels much better.
What's the risk? Why is it a high risk? What's the risk?
Because I think he's going to request another trade at some point, or he's going to cause a stake, or may not show up
between now and February.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think
that you think he'll try to just like, I really wanted to play with the Clippers.
Yeah. Like I think you'd have to certainly before you even sniff around, you'd have to reach out to his agent and be like, is he gonna what's the long-term goal here? Is this like what we've heard regarding Aaron Goodwin and when they realized
here's the reason why I think James Harden doesn't want to.
Hold on. When they realized that Joe Cronin wasn't going to deal with Miami because of Miami's assets or whatever, or because of just bad blood, Aaron Goodwin was like, well, what about Milwaukee? What about Brooklyn? I think that's what it would take. If they reach out to Harden's agent and they're like, look, the Clippers aren't going to happen. Morey's done with them. He's not going to take whatever offer they give him. then they'd have to do their due diligence and say, would there be a possibility of him wanting to come to Miami, and would he be happy and engaged here? If the answer is yes, then yes, the risk is mitigated and you take that chance. I just don't know that Miami wants to even take whatever chance there is.
Dame settled for Milwaukee and Brooklyn. He wanted Miami, right? That's like Dame was like,
but that was a championship contender.
Sure, absolutely. That's not what the part I'm debating. I'm just like, it is a fact that he settled for Milwaukee or Brooklyn. We know this. It's going to work. It might work out in Milwaukee. That's not at all what I'm saying here. So people listening, please don't take that out of context. But he wanted Miami and get there. But that's like, you're hanging out at the bar. There's that chick that you're kind of talking to, but she goes home early, but you're still at the bar, and you end up just going home with somebody else at like 3 a.m., right? That's kind of what happened for Dame. In this respect for James Harden, this is like the Heat are the girl at the bar that you don't think is ever going to even talk to you. Like, he's like, wait, they would want me? No way. Like, that's what I think this would be. Like, he's like, the Clippers would want me because they don't even need their star players to play. And I love that. Like, they're willing to deal with anything from Kawhi and Paul George. Those guys walk all over that front office. That's perfect for me. They'll just bring me right in. Everything will be kumbaya, baby. Like, I'm not anything new to them. But like, he's like, that Heat girl will never talk to me. That will never happen. And then all of a sudden, she walks up to you and she says, "Why haven't you bought me a drink yet?" Like, that would be what would happen here, I think, for James Harden. Then again, I have no idea. I just think that, look, generally speaking, like James Harden is, and the reason why the Heat will never talk to him is because he's the opposite of Heat culture, right? You have Heat culture and then you have Harden culture, and those two things are polar opposites, okay? But based on their actions over these last few months and how much it seems like the Heat want to upgrade that same exact position with the player type that James Harden on the court is, right? Off the court, that's where all the issues are. On the court, he's kind of exactly what they've been looking for. I don't know. I would have been shocked a few months ago. I would be less shocked now if they ever. I have no reporting on this at all. I just would be less shocked if something just like, if we got this Woj tweet all of a sudden that was like, Miami Heat are engaged in conversations with the Philadelphia 76ers to acquire James Harden.
No, I'm leaning into it a little bit. I could see on some parts working. And maybe I'll, change tune after they've won like 10 straight and he's putting up 11 assists a game during that stretch, and Miami all of a sudden contends for the one or two seed in the Eastern Conference. Sure.
If it's Lowry and Duncan, you got to include PJ Tucker in that deal to make the salaries work.
You've mentioned that, and
if you're Philly, you get off the Tucker deal. You get off the Harden thing. You bring in Duncan Robinson, who is actually the kind of player you need to space the floor around Maxey and Joel Embiid. You get Kyle Lowry's expiring, Philadelphia native. You can do that whole storyline for a year. That's always fun. And then you're off you're off that long-term PJ Tucker deal that you didn't want. I'd rather have the Duncan Robinson deal than the PJ Tucker deal if I'm Philadelphia. And if I'm Miami, I get a starting power forward, possibly at PJ Tucker, depending on what he looks like at this stage of his career. And I get James Harden, and I get off the Lowry contract, which is expiring, so it's not a big deal. And I get off the long-term Duncan Robinson money. So worst case scenario is I free up a bunch of money after the year.
We'll see what happens.
I'm just putting it out there. I'm not asking you to tell me that you're into it. I'm just saying. I just wanted to lay it all out there. Those are the names that I'm looking at, and we'll see. Yeah, you're right. We'll see what happens, I suppose. But we still have training camp, and I don't know, more trade rumors, I guess, depending on everything that goes on, because that's what the NBA is about now. We should hear from Jimmy Butler at some point in training camp this week with normal hair, so that'll be interesting and fun. We'll get a sense of what he thinks this Miami Heat roster needs and where it stands and how he measures it. So stay tuned for that. Of course, remember, if you missed any of our interviews from Media Day, you could check those out individually posted over on our YouTube channel, or you could find them kind of strung together, parts 1, 2, and 3, wherever it is that you get your podcast. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, we'll be back next week. Later this week with more interviews, with more takeaways from training camp. So hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow us on your podcast app.